Hi, my name is Tom Dursa, and I'm 84 years old, and this is Jake. He's a 3-year-old mini schnauzer. Well, Jake asked me the other day, or actually about 2 years ago, if I would consider doing a podcast. So we thought about it for a while, actually 2 years, and Jake came up with the name Jake and the Old Fart. This is Jake, of course, and you're looking at the old fart that's talking to you. We decided we're going to do a number of things to give a perspective to you about how an old fart thinks. We'll talk about politics, of course, healthcare, education, economics, and just about anything else that perks our interest over the next couple of months or years, if we last that long. A little bit about my Jake. He was born September 30th, 3 years ago, and I was born in 1941, which makes me 84 years old. Thus, Jake and the Old Fart. Now, Jake doesn't have much of a history. We picked him up in a place called Nordig, just along the side of the Rocky Mountain House, and he and I had a ride together to get to our home in Leduc, which was about a 2-hour drive, and we bonded. He's been my buddy ever since. Aren't you, Jake? Yeah, good boy. At any rate, we thought we'd pass along some of our thoughts about various things. My background, I was born in Newport, Rhode Island. I went and started my education at the university level in a place called Albuquerque, New Mexico, at the University of New Mexico. But life has its own ups and downs, and for the next 6 years, I went from New Mexico to Cape Cod Community College, to the University of Massachusetts, and finally to Colorado State University in Fort Collins, Colorado, where I picked up a Bachelor of Social Science and began a teaching career that lasted for 38 years. And along the way, I became a pretty good teacher. I also became an administrator, first as a vice principal and then a principal. And not to beat my own horn, but to beat my own horn, became a pretty fair high school basketball coach. I took my teams to Australia a couple of times, to the United States, and to the East, to Ottawa, during my career as a basketball coach. I had 14 provincial zone champions and a couple that did fairly well at the provincial level. I grew up in a place called Provincetown, Massachusetts. It's got to be one of the most unique places in the world to grow up as a child. In the beginning, in the 1950s, it was basically a Portuguese village for year-round, but in the summertime it attracted tourists from all over the world, including a lot of artisans. Some of the best artists of the time, writers of the time, like Gene O'Neill, and artists like Robert Motherwell came. Artists said to me that it was the light, that the Provincetown light was unique. And Provincetown is one of the very rare places on the East Coast where the sun rises from the water and sets from the water because of the shape of the cape, particularly at Provincetown. Anyway, I was a naive Portuguese, Lithuanian child when I left Provincetown. And I would get an education over the next 40 years, traveling in various parts of the United States. We lived for a while in New Hampshire, and I was a principal and vice principal in a place called Sunapee, and then a vice principal there, and a principal in a place called Pittsburgh, right at the top. In fact, I was there the day 9/11 occurred. We, again, traveled back. We lived in Saskatchewan and various places in the United States, and of course throughout Alberta from the north in Spirit River to the far south in Milk River. Kind of interesting choice of names. But we enjoyed the smaller communities. We didn't like the urban areas. We grew up in a small town, and we thought our career would be best served in small communities. So it wasn't until we moved to Leduc here in 2008, that we've lived in a town that was more than 4,000 or 5,000. Now, what we'd like to do is just pass our our opinion is an old fart about various things. I mean, you got to realize we grew up with a telephone hung on the wall, and we had to speak to an operator to get a phone number. And of course, we had party lines where we sometimes picked up the line and heard another conversation from another family, to the point where we now have our handheld iPhones. I'm an Apple. I favor Apple over the other instruments, because when I started teaching, Apple introduced computers at a reasonable rate for teachers, and therefore I stay, and I've basically enjoyed the Apple technology. Today I have iPads, several of them. I have 2 computers and a number of iPhones for my wife and myself. Though mine is kind of an old one. It's more or less a phone rather than an iPhone. Now, just the other day, or today in fact, the Americans celebrated Thanksgiving. In Canada, we celebrate it in October, mainly because that's when the harvest is over and the thanks is given to the fact that the harvest has been completed, or pretty well completed by then. In the United States, Thanksgiving is in November because it's based on our tradition that some are suspect if it actually really truly happened, about giving thanks living with First Nations people. And it really doesn't have that much to do with harvest, unless you're interested in pumpkins and turkeys. In Canada, the harvest is the fact that the fields have been cleaned and cultivated. Now, I'm trying to read something that I wrote, and in the future I don't intend to do this, but to give it a start, I thought we would read it. A little bit about my father. When he was 10 years old, his mom died, and strong Catholic family. His dad had 3 boys and a daughter. The 2 oldest boys, he couldn't handle it. He was he worked in the textile mills in Lowell. In those days, it was not unusual for a family who's lost their mother for the older children to be placed in an orphanage. So Dad was placed in an orphanage when he was 10 years old, and he lived there until he was 17. When he turned 17, he got his permission from his dad to join the U.S. Navy. And from 1930, he became a Navy personnel. He served right on until 1950, put his 20 years in, came out as a chief warrant officer, served in World War II, and has ribbons for some major battles in the Pacific. In 1950, in 1947, he knew he was going to be retiring, and didn't want me to spend years going from places like Newport to Groton to Norfolk. So he bought a home in Provincetown, where my mother had grown up, and I began my career in high school, primary school, in grade 1 in 1947. I would stay in Provincetown for the next 12 years, graduating from Provincetown in 1959. After that, I got the wanderlust that my dad must have had, because my first university was in the University of New Mexico, 2,300 miles away. And from there, things happened. I went thinking I was going to be an archaeologist, or the first Indiana Jones, but then I decided no, that wasn't for me, and I transferred to Cape Cod Community College. And Jake's getting a little rambunctious and probably wants to leave, so we'll let him get down. Come on, boy. So I went to Cape Cod Community College. In fact, I was one of the first students on their first year of operation. And then we moved to the University of Massachusetts in Amherst for the next 2 to 3 years. And finally went to Colorado State University in Fort Collins to complete my undergraduate degree. it would take me about 20 odd years before I decided to finish my master's. That was in 1989 in Gonzaga University, and I'm a big Bulldogs fan, as having experience as a basketball coach. We lived, my wife and I, an interesting story. I was single when I came up in 1967 to Canada, and in 1969 I had established myself as a basketball coach, and I tried to get a hold of my ex-principal who was coaching in a town not too far away, and I tried to call him. And in those days you had to go through an operator. The operator picked up my call, and my friend, unbeknownst to me, was out at a basketball practice. And in those days you could ask the operator to repeat the call every 15 or 20 minutes, and so she did over the next couple hours. And finally I reached him, and we couldn't make an arrangement because our schedule conflicted enough that we couldn't schedule an exhibition game. But during that time I had talked to this operator, and she was very friendly. She had a very beautiful voice and had a good sense of humor. At the end of the conversation with my coach, I get a phone call from the operator asking for my time and charges. I hadn't asked for that, and usually you didn't get it unless you asked for it. So I thought, maybe. And so I asked a question, and she shouldn't have answered, but I got her phone number, but no name. So I searched through the telephone book and came up with the family name. So I decided to make a call next day. Well, the coincidence is the very next day, the operator I got had been an operator that I had dated in the past, but things hadn't gone very well. And as she was making the phone call, I asked which girl with the name of the phone was working at AGT, or the Alberta Government Telephone. She turned to me and she said, "Which one?" Now the phone call is being processed and it's beginning to ring, and I quickly say, "The one that's not going steady." So she gave me a name. So I asked for that person. Well, I heard a shriek in the background. Long story short, we met later that month on a blind date. That was in December. In February, on her birthday, I proposed, and we got married that June, 55 years ago, and I'm still very proud to say she's my wife. So for an old heart, I didn't do too bad when I was much younger. Anyway, that's about all for today. Like I say, we intend to do this every couple of days. We'll get back to you. What we want to talk to you about is healthcare. That seems to be a big thing with the Americans today, and the confusion between what they call socialist medicine and the healthcare system that they have. Anyway, Jake's gone, and so am I.